So the recent debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris took place a couple days ago. And my initial impressions, and a lot of people I thought agreed with me on X, was the fact that I thought Trump did a pretty good job. But my reasoning behind this is, a couple of reasons. I thought, what he did against Kamala Harris and a lot of the hoaxes I thought, she spewed throughout the debate to try to get Trump off his game. He did a pretty good job. Whether it was like the find people on all sides hoax, or when he was talking about January 6th and what he said on X, or when he was talking about the election, I thought he did a pretty good job in saying that he didn't do any of those things. Well, I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Cooper?
My initial impressions, I think, are vastly different than yours.
Okay.
I think Trump basically performed as well as he did against Joe Biden, which is, at the end of it, I was very upset at Donald Trump because there are so many missed opportunities that Donald Trump could have actually done really, really well against Joe Biden, and he failed on those opportunities, and he did the exact same thing with Kamala Harris. And because he didn't do those things, I think it made the debate much closer than it actually has to be. I actually don't think Donald Trump performed particularly well. The things that you were saying that you enjoyed him doing, the things that he was defending himself upon, the accusations that Kamala Harris was saying, I don't think that necessarily makes him winning the debate. Whenever you're playing defensive in a debate and you're having to explain yourself, generally that means you're losing. And the fact that he's having to re-explain all the things about January 6th and he's going down these deep and tidy rabbit holes that honestly at this point, probably the majority of American people don't care anymore. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of the questions that the moderators were asking were completely ridiculous, and I'm sure we're going to get into that. Yep. But overall, I was actually very, very angry watching the entire debate because every single time a topic came up, I thought Donald Trump has the opportunity to just destroy Kamala Harris on these issues. Yeah. Her record in this particular aspect is terrible. Like, just say these certain things. But I am asking a lot for Donald Trump because he's never been kind of that person to be able to create that kind of argument and say it in the most articulate way ever. Mm-hmm. He makes a lot of jokes and he rambles quite a bit. And he makes great, interesting points, but he doesn't finish them and he doesn't expand upon them. So some of the great lines that he was saying didn't make a whole lot of sense because you needed a lot more context. And so to an average person that's watching this debate, I feel like they didn't get that kind of game that Donald Trump plays, and they don't quite understand the things he was saying. So I honestly was actually very, very disappointed in Donald Trump, but I'm reminded that I'm probably asking for something that Donald Trump couldn't actually deliver. But ultimately, I honestly don't think it will matter that much. But I am very disappointed in kind of what he was able to do.
According to Trump, if you saw his Truth Social, he was talking about how he had the best debate of his life. I mean, at least according to him, at least positivity there. But, I think the thing is, in my impression, I think Trump actually had the best debate performance in terms of if he was going against a rational politician. Because I think he answered the questions right in the sense that if you're talking about truth and not truth, if you're thinking in those ways, then yeah, I think Trump did a good job. But when we're looking at this debate, I mean, none of it is about truth or not truth. This is not a debate between Nixon and JFK, right? This is a debate between the radical left and Trump. I think a lot of it has to do with emotions and what people perceive it as. Because, I mean, I think, going into it, we already knew the Democrats, the people who are ingrained in Kamala Harris's base, would obviously never change their mind on all these hoaxes. So whatever Trump said in response to all these hoaxes, it would never change opinion because they would never do the research to do it. And, same on the Republican side, they would never agree on anything Kamala was saying. So what you were trying to do here was effectively, create emotion and like, oh, who felt more patriotic, who felt more in the situation. And, like you said, I thought Trump actually didn't do a good job in these kind of easy layups, that he could have done. Like when I was talking about the good people on all sides hoax, my initial reaction was that I thought he did an effective job in saying, oh, I don't take this. I did not say that. But what he should have done was that he should have went further and talking about like when they mentioned that, I think it was one of the moderators mentioned this in the debate. But so this, what I'm talking about specifically, was about a man, Scott Adams. He's a commentator, and he talks specifically about this. And he was talking about the good people on sides hoax, and he said Trump should have went further than this. He should have told the American people, rather than, okay, yeah, I didn't do this, but to talk further and say, the Biden administration has been pushing this since day one, something that's completely false, accusations against what I did, and that you can actually look at a reputable source called Snopes, which is true, that you could see what's true and what's not true, and then you could see what actually took place. And I think that's what he should have done. He should have told the American people blatantly what they were doing was wrong. And I think you mentioned this specifically. He wasn't mentioning anything on Kamala's record. And that was a huge problem about what Trump did. And I think he should have done a better job of that.
Yes, absolutely. That is the biggest misstep, is the fact that what you're not taking into consideration are the independents, which the independents are the people that make up the winners of elections and who's victor and who's victorious. And that percentage is actually a very, very small number of the population. If you take the total number of independents, divide that by the people that are registered, divide that by the people that are actually going to be coming out to vote on election day or vote early, it's like 3% of the population. It's a very, very small number of people. And polls were coming out beforehand that 30% of Americans were not sold yet or needed to know more information about Kamala Harris and about her policies. So a third of Americans don't really know what Kamala Harris stands for, which makes sense because she changes her position every other day. Yeah. But it was Donald Trump's mission to paint the picture of Kamala Harris to the American people. And that's the thing that he didn't do. He allowed her to talk in these like weird abstract rambles where she didn't talk about any issue. She didn't answer any question that the moderator gave her. One of the very first questions that they asked Kamala Harris was, are the American people better off today than they were 4 years ago?
Yeah.
And she did not answer the question. She completely backtracked and swiveled on everything and just talked about like her upbringing for a little bit and her being a middle-class family. Donald Trump should have ended the debate right then by saying, Kamala Harris, like, I'm sorry, she did not answer the question. I will answer the question for her. No, the American people all know that they are not better off today than they were 4 years ago when I was president. And that is because of you and the president of the United States. It is your actions that have caused the record high inflation, the crisis at the southern borders, wars breaking out across the world. That would have ended the debate like immediately if he was able to make that kind of articulated argument. And he did that at the very end of the debate when he was making his closing statements. When he said, look at her record. She hasn't done anything. In 3.5 years, she hasn't done a single thing. If that was his opening statements, then I think that he would have been on a much better path in painting Kamala Harris in the actual light that he needed to. Instead of just calling her a communist and calling her a Marxist, explain why she's a Marxist. Because again, the American people don't know this. And that's the people that you're trying to inform about, is that small section of independents that are people that are still looking to understand what Kamala is actually about.
Actually, I'll tell you what I agree and disagree under your assumption. I agree with you. That is one of Trump's huge weaknesses. In a sense, he can't really defend himself in situations, or he can't really express his opinions on the basis of other, candidates. What he's really good at is making trendy posts that, like Crooked Hillary, or what he said about Rosie O'Donnell. When he said something about Rosie O'Donnell. Yeah. That trendy moment. But what he's not good at doing, and I mean, I noticed this throughout the debate and other debates, was explaining the faults of other candidates' policies. And you effectively mentioned that. What I disagree with was that I actually think there was a couple of situations during the debate that he effectively talked about certain things. For example, when he was talking about the border crisis, and this is what the part where I was like, okay, this is how he got her. And there were points where he should have got her and he didn't. But this is where he got her. When he was talking about the border policy, he was saying, if you want to change this right now, if you want to change the border, you could do it right now. Call Biden up at 4 p.m. when he wakes up and sign the agreement. That's all you need to do as president. That's the executive order. Why haven't you done that? he did a great job in that. I thought he did a very good job at that point. And what I think he actually did a good job on was he didn't, as you recall, didn't really talk about policies when he was talking about Kamala's fracking, but he mentioned to the American people that Kamala Harris was in favor of fracking a few years ago and then switched her mind. That she was actually against fracking a couple of years ago, and now she's changed her mind. So what's up with Kamala Harris? Does she actually want fracking or not? And that might make an impact if we're talking about Pennsylvania voters, if they're watching this and they're in this swing state situation and they're not decided between Kamala Harris and Trump. That might be the deal breaker into deciding who they want effectively.
Of course, those things are the issues that, if you brought up, make a huge difference, and that's true. The problem is that Donald Trump did not do a great job effectively communicating that. We are people that are involved in politics constantly, and so when he brings up something, like, obviously we know what it means. We can remember the quote that Kamala Harris said, 3-4 years ago about her saying, "I want to ban fracking, that I want to do a mandatory gun buyback program."
Right.
But when he says it in the middle of a jumbled mess of sentences, and he says something great in the middle of that, it's been covered up and down between like other things he's saying, and it's not concise enough for people to quite recognize what she means. When he says that she's a Marxist, like, explain the policy that she said. Talk about the time that she was talking about how talking about those exact same issues. Talk about when you're talking about that you don't own guns. Talk about, like, this time you talked about a mandatory gun buyback program. Like, this time you were talking about anti-fracking. Now you're saying you're for fracking. Like, which are you?
Yeah.
What of your opinions have changed? You say your values haven't changed. She literally said that at the beginning of the debate, that her values haven't changed. Well, why are your policies changing if your values haven't changed? Like, you need to play the part of the moderator, right, if you're Donald Trump, because we all know for the last several months, or the last month and more, that Kamala Harris has not been asked any serious questions by any news reporter. And so he should have played the game and be like, you know what, I'm really, really excited to be here at this debate. I hope the moderators will do a great job and actually ask you some difficult questions, but I'm going to be here to ask you actually serious questions that the American people want to know about. And I would take time out of my response to this stuff and turn to Kamala Harris and ask her question, which Donald Trump did do once, which I actually think was the best moment he ever did, which is when he said, "Kamala Harris, are you in favor of a 6 month of allowing abortions up to 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months? Like, answer the question." And she didn't do that. But I wanted to, because that I thought was the best part of Donald Trump. He needed to do that a lot more. But I will give him some credit. It wasn't all his fault. It wasn't all his doing to do that. The moderators had a huge portion in why they didn't do that.
Yeah.
Normally in a debate, the moderator would turn and be like, "Kamala Harris, you want to answer that question?" And then she would say something nonsensical, of course, and then Donald Trump would go and be like, "Yeah, see, she's in favor of 9-month abortions."
Yeah.
And I think that can lead into the other discussion that I think we need to talk about, which is the atrocious behavior of the moderators, which I think has been universally understood at this point. Like, it was the worst I've ever seen in a presidential debate history, where they were falsely fact checking Donald Trump in real time. Didn't do a single thing for Kamala Harris when she was lying constantly, and constantly interrupting Trump when he was making points. It was remarkably bad, and ABC should be ashamed of themselves. And I hope it kind of bites them in the back.
Oh yeah, and like, okay, well, I'll quickly say this. Okay, when you was talking about the beginning, when you talked about the beginning, and they were asking about, you think we're worse or well off in the past 4 years? I mean, Kamala Harris completely avoided that question, and they didn't say anything in response to that. But I mean, it could have also been because she had a great media training, which allowed her to do that, deflect the question. But the fact that they didn't even push back on that was the problem. And the one thing the moderators actually said against Kamala Harris was talking about her healthcare policy, was saying that it was more related to Bernie Sanders and why now she's believing in private healthcare. And Trump didn't push back on that. And I think, I want to just talk about this really quickly. One thing I noticed also, and this was wrong with Trump, he was only talking about Joe Biden throughout the entire debate. In terms of like what he did wrong in his administration, he didn't say anything about Kamala Harris, about her role in the border czar, or anything related to what her policies were. I mean, she mentioned that her father was a Marxist, but unless you're a fan of Donald Trump, no, you're not going to really understand what he was saying about that. But okay, in regards to the moderators, when we're talking about the moderators, they were real. I mean, they were like pretty much pushing the Democrat um, ideology narrative. I mean, because I mean, obviously, Kamala Harris mentioned the good people on all sides hoax, and I think she mentioned a little bit about January 6th, but the moderators were also pushing back on talking about Trump and talking about his involvement and what he thinks about the election or what he thought about January 6th and what if he thought what he did was wrong. I mean, you're not supposed to do that. That's a leading question. That's as a moderator, that's pretty much that's like a no for you to do is a leading question. So they really effectively did him wrong in that situation. So, I mean, there was none of that debate between the moderators really that showed any non-bias. I mean, I actually thought the CNN moderators were a lot better than them.
Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air to see at least the CNN moderators
Yeah.
like actually were really well in getting themselves disconnected from that and letting the candidates speak. This one, they were interjecting constantly, and it actually made it a much less entertaining watch because, again, you're not hearing the candidates. I do not think Kamala Harris actually performed particularly well. I think she was filled with weird, nonsensical ramblings where she's talking about like the soul of the country and moving forward, and it was all terrible talking points. Not a single thing about policy, really. The only thing she ever talked about policy-wise is I'm going to bribe the American people by giving them money. That's it.
Yeah.
And I wish Donald Trump would have said something like that. And then the few times that he did push back, again, I don't think he did it in the most effective way possible. And they were just wide open gaps. So ultimately, I think it was kind of a lame night, to be honest. And I honestly don't think it'll matter too much after the next few days. I think it just reaffirms everyone like, goodness gracious, the media is terrible. I'd imagine that they're not going to do a second one. I know Kamala Harris originally came out and said like, yes, absolutely, let's do another one because obviously she thinks she won. And there was a lot of people that do. And I think most people might say it was probably even. And if it's even, then the media will say that it goes to Kamala Harris, obviously. And it shouldn't have been that way. Like Donald Trump's performance against Joe Biden, he didn't have to do a whole lot because Joe Biden was such a terrible, senile old man that he kind of pushed himself over the edge himself.
Yeah.
And so I think that his performance there was so much superior compared to this one. I don't know if I'll see Donald Trump actually want to do that debate again because at this point he kind of dodged the bullet again because I don't think this is going to affect him too much. Everyone already understands what Donald Trump is. You can't slander him any more than it's already happened. But he didn't do a good job defining Kamala Harris, and I don't know if he has it in him. I'm wanting him to do things that I know Donald Trump can't do because he is an imperfect candidate, and I want him to do things that he can't do physically. I don't know if it's his ego or it's the temperament that is partly why we like Donald Trump, but it's also is what the faults that come with a candidate like Donald Trump is. He has some quirks that make things very difficult and make it annoying to like him and always rooting for him. But then there's some positives that come along with that. And so I feel like this will be the end of the presidential debates. And aside from any major catastrophe happening, I don't see anything in the near future that's going to swing anything, any polls or any voters in any particular direction. I think it's going to be a really, really razor close decision by the end of the election. And it's my prediction is going to look a lot like 2016. I still put Donald Trump winning, but I think it'll be very, very close.
Yeah, I just want to add something before we end soon. One thing I want to mention was that when we're looking at the debate, I think Trump's biggest mistake, before I go on my last point, Trump's biggest mistake was the fact that when she was talking about the rallies, and she's talking about how his rallies were, had nobody there. I think she was baiting him and to bait him to do the answer. And I think when he did that bait, it kind of diminished his ability to, kind of come back from that debate because he was effectively pretty much being on the defense after that point. And I think that's what was negative strategy on his hand. But lastly, what I want to say was that, I didn't notice till recently, but the person who owns Disney and ABC, who is like the president of ABC and of of Disney, was actually very good friends with Kamala Harris. I didn't know that till recently. And what I'm thinking, and this, this might be far fetched, but she definitely seemed pretty well prepared for a lot of those questions that she was getting asked. And I think and you could see the rebuttals, she wasn't so well prepared during the debate, but she was very well prepared for the initial question. And what I'm thinking, is it possible that her friend helped her in the debate to effectively answer these questions? I'm just putting out there. I don't know for sure if there's a collusion here or not. But I mean, if we're talking about all the moderators going on Kamala Harris's side like that, I mean, it's not far fetched to believe that her friend would help her, who has that much influence within ABC and Disney.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's speculatory, and I wouldn't want to purport any information that's unproven or unvaluable. But it is kind of a funny, like, it happened with Hillary Clinton. We know that she was actually fed questions in 2016 to help her prepare for stuff like that. I know there's a kind of a silly thing going around where it's like she's got earrings that have earpieces in it, which, I mean, maybe we'll never know.
We'll never know.
But maybe.
We'll never know.
But that being said, we really appreciate you guys taking your time to watch Tolerant. Zach, it's great to always talk to you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
It's great talking to you too, Cooper.